Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. For all the excitement over the new He-Man Netflix series, I don't know, I just wanted to look at all my old He-Man books and some of my collection, and I realised, of course, I didn't have a YouTube channel when I got some of these, so I thought I'd do a little overview of some of them. I love looking at other people's unboxing or overview or review videos because it's always interesting to see other people's collections or to see items you don't have. Sometimes it can be a bit of a preview if you're looking to buy something, or sometimes you'll see something you didn't even know existed. So I'm going to start off with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe mini comics collection. Now, anyone who bought the toys in the 80s would remember the mini comics. Now, I had a whole big pile of them, but I actually sold them all off and then bought this because they took up a lot of space, and other collectors will know space is a problem when you're a collector. And I actually really was happy with the quality of the printing of the Omnibus, and I sort of thought I'm just going to keep a few of the ones that I really remember, and just to remember what they were like to have, and get rid of the rest and buy the volume instead of trying to collect them all separately, because I had been doing that for years. I had about 50 or so, and it was a bit of a nightmare because I'd see them in collectible stores and I can remember which ones I had, which ones I didn't. So yeah, so the early ones, so they're more like storybooks, and they just had an image and text, and later on they were more like regular comic books, but of course nowhere near the size of a comic book. And the quality got better as they went along. They became much more accurate to the toy line, slightly better quality of art, and the original comic started about 82 when they produced the first few toys, and at that point they hadn't developed the series, and once they did that, they had the canon and the mythology sorted out, and a lot of consistency came into them because the first comics were very inconsistent. Now, yeah, I usually end up using the postcards from the DVD box sets as bookmarks for the He-Man books. The only thing I didn't like about the whole series of books from Dark Horse, because this one was 2015, I think November 2015 came out. It's about 1,200 pages. It has all the mini comics from He-Man, She-Ra, the later different variations of He-Man, and some storybooks and books and tapes as well as a bunch of supplementary material, interviews with the creators. It's quite extensive, and the only thing I don't like about it, such a small nitpick, is the opening page. Just making all the artwork blue. They all have the same thing. I just wish they'd done a faded thing or sepia or something. I just don't like the blue. That's the only thing. It's a very small nitpick. The rest of it is pretty awesome. Now, as I said, it goes through everything. It goes from the original He-Man and the Master of the Universe comics, goes through to She-Ra, and the newer He-Man, and 2002 He-Man, and some, because they didn't all have mini comics later on, but they did a few odd ones for the 2002 series and the classics, and these are included in here, as well as, like I said, some of the books. So here we have a comparison. Like, that's the size of the original, and that's the size of the reprint. It's basically twice the size, and these feel a lot smaller as an adult, because when you were reading them as a kid, of course, they seemed a lot bigger. So this is kind of like how I remember reading them as a kid, because they felt bigger, and the artwork holds up. So the printing, having them printed at a bigger size, doesn't really ruin them or anything. They still look good, they hold up. Now, originally, like I said, He-Man was just a wandering warrior. I think he was just given the sword, and they didn't really have the whole mythology of the original He-Man sorted out, because that sort of came with the TV series the next year. So the comics changed, the story changed, the origin stories changed. But like the first 4 issues or so were basically storybook design where you just had one image per page and text, until you eventually got to, I think the Ram Man comic was the first one that was comic, just a traditional comic with speech bubbles. And of course they go through all of the ones from 82, 83, 84. Not sure how much time I should spend actually looking at them. I mean, if you've got the volume, you've seen it. If you haven't, you're obviously going to be curious of all of these. Now, to show you the difference between some of the printing, that's original comic. And yes, my name used to be Stephen Carter. I changed it legally. So these are all the old mini comics my mother wrote my name on, so no one would steal them when I was a kid, because I'd take them to school in my lunchbox so I could read them. And you can see there's a little bit of difference with the printing, but it's not drastic. Some of it just comes from the old comics being discoloured. Some of it comes from the scanning. They are putting in a bit too much contrast. But for the most part, the printing is very good, and a lot of it, the art is actually darker, and the colours are a bit more rich. But it varies. But for the most part, I'm very happy with this, because I got rid of a lot of the comics that I actually had, because I thought this will do me. I can just keep this and just get lost in this and look through this whenever I want to, whenever I feel like I need to have a look at He-Man. I managed to find, obviously, a lot, and I'd read a lot of them, but there's a lot I hadn't found. Some I saw, other kids saw them in collectible stores. Sometimes I just couldn't remember which ones I had, so I didn't buy them. But it was a bit of a nightmare collecting them, because there were a lot of them, and I couldn't really find a list, so I didn't know how many there were and what I was looking for. So to have them all in one volume, all together, as much as I think they probably could have done 2 volumes, one for the straight mini comics and one for all the variations, just so it's not quite as bulky. But having them all in one volume as well, that you can just sort of get lost in for ages because it's so big, it has its own appeal as well. But one of the interesting things was they included a few of the storybooks, the book and tape versions and stuff like that, which for the most part were about that size. It's not the exact same one, but so you can see if they'd done another volume, this shape, because obviously this is the shape of the mini comics for the most part, and if they'd done another volume for all the storybooks and the book and tapes and some of the variations, I think that would have had its own merit, but I'm not sure if they would have had enough material to do that. But they're in here anyway, so it's very completionist, and some of them have art by the same artists, and it's very interesting, and it's great because I never saw some of these. I saw some of them when I was a kid. I had some of them when I was a kid. Like other kids had them as well, so I saw them, but I didn't have them all. So it's great to have them all and be able to read all the ones that I'd never even seen. So here's another example. I don't know why, but I cut the corners off them. I think they got frayed and dog-eared, and I just trimmed them. But it's pretty true. The printing, the quality, is pretty consistent, as you can see. And I think they included, well, they don't include this, like, okay, they don't have the end page. There's very, very little supplementary material with these comics. Very little. You'll get the occasional ad for something on the back, but mostly it was just the actual characters. And the supplementary material is mostly interviews with the comic creators, the writers, the designers, a little bit of information about some of the individual comics, because with different variations there's a little bit of material just talking about why this is different or how something changed, or so it's all very interesting to look at. And quality didn't really vary much. The quality was pretty consistent through the whole lot. A lot of the artwork holds up. Some of it looks like it was done for a smaller size, so when it's blown up it it doesn't look quite as nice, but most of them are pretty much done the same quality as you'd expect from a normal comic book or storybook, and the printing holds up. And I guess if you haven't seen these, it'll be interesting. If you haven't seen exactly what's in the book, it'll be interesting. But I have that one as well. Where is that? Because some of the printing is really accurate. Like that one, the colours are right spot on. Actually, I take that back. That's more pink. But I think the book is consistent, whereas the individual mini comics are going to vary depending on where they were printed, but overall quality is very consistent. I think some of the light tones get a bit lost in the reprinting, like that green. It's kind of very faded there. There's a little bit of that. I've noticed that with some other comic reprints, and it's just something that just sort of happens because a lot of these are they're just scanning the originals with a high quality scanner, and they don't have the actual original printed material to copy. Fortunately, some of the other reprints of comics I've seen are pretty bad, where they're copying the copy. They did that with Transformers. The first ones from Titan were gorgeous, and then IDW reprinted them, and they basically just photocopied or scanned the other volumes, and the printing was so bad. It was just awful. And I got them though anyway, because the other ones, I didn't have them all, so I had to get the poor quality versions to complete the collection. And then they went and did them again with better quality and reprinting, remastering. So I ended up having 3 volumes of Transformers just to get them. So at least this is all in one. I don't think they're going to do it again. I think they've covered everything, and it's not going to be the issue, because Transformers, I think they've done it 4 or 5 times. They've reprinted the comics, and I ended up collecting 3 of the series. So the series just goes through, and later on it's more accurate with the toys. It's more about the toys. Each, I think, wave had less characters and less comics. So as you go along, there's less, and they produced less of them, so some of the later ones are actually hard to find. The earlier ones, they made a lot more of them, so they come up a lot more. And I'm not going to get through all this if I don't go a bit quicker. But yeah, so like I said, some of the storybooks are in here, and that's some beautiful art. So I'm glad these are featured, because now I don't have to go collect them. Because I know a lot of people are very specific about the collections and the quality and having the originals and that, but I don't have the space for a lot of it. I don't have the time to find it, or the money to buy good quality copies. So I'm quite happy to have something reprinted in an omnibus. It saves me a bit of effort. So I'm just going to go through into the 84, 85, 86 stuff now. 85. So I don't want this video to be too long. I want to get to She-Ra. Where's She-Ra? Wow. I think for 82 or so. I don't know if that's because it's the same year it started, or I'm remembering that number, but I think there were quite a few of them. Now, they actually did one for the Masters Universe movie, because they had several characters from that were put into the toy line. They didn't quite match, but they did a comic for that as well. I never saw that. And what was the other series, that variation of He-Man? Yeah, the Power of Grayskull. They tried to relaunch He-Man where they were like with dinosaurs, and they did like one of those. She-Ra had 2 of those. I sold one, kept the other one. They did a lot of them, much like the original He-Man. There were quite a few that went with the dolls. And same thing, same quality artwork. I'm not sure they were done by the same people, because I think DC mostly handled the mini comics. At some point they changed over to people from DC. So like I said, the first few it was a bit inconsistent, but later on it was fairly consistent. She-Ra. Although some of the She-Ra ones, the art was kind of a bit more like the Machine Men comics, not quite as good quality. a little bit more, which I don't know if it was a slightly sexist thing where they just felt like the girls would not appreciate the more sophisticated art and comic book art, and it was more storybook-like, a bit softer, as you can see, very light, very pastel. And I think the appeal of She-Ra was that she was just like He-Man. She was a strong figure and action hero, and I think they tended to girly the She-Ra line up a little bit, and that kind of undermined it a bit. Because when I was looking at some of the She-Ra stuff later on, I found that a bit underwhelming, because the early comics were exactly the same as the He-Man mini comics. So we got extra supplementary material, got little... Because She-Ra had lots of different costumes, they treated her a little bit like Barbie. I want to keep this video under 20 minutes. And there's actually a lot more She-Ra than I thought. Okay, now we get to He-Man, New Adventures of He-Man. They did some of those comics as well. And only a couple. Then we get to, okay, we're up to 3. To a few of them. And then when they finally did the 2002 He-Man series, they didn't have comics included with all the toys, which I didn't realise right away because I didn't really collect them at the time because I was older. I was an adult, but I ended up kind of buying some of them later and realising they didn't have many comics, but they did have a comic line running at the same time. So they did a couple of comics which were included in, I think, some more of the collectible versions, or the like the Comic Con versions or something, so special editions and stuff. So they did a little bit of that, and these are included in here as well, and information about, I guess, exactly like there's some of the packs of comics had a comic, packs of toys had a comic with them. So we get a little bit of that, which is of course modern art, very much the same quality as the actual comics that were being released separately. And yeah, just a few variations, and pretty much everything is covered in here, and it's very extensive. You can just really get lost in it, and just, I love it. It's one of my favourite things. I bought it and I just like was leafing through it for like weeks. I still haven't read the whole thing, because it is 1,200 pages or more, and then supplementary material on top of that. Wow, I've still got more comics. I actually thought I was done then. And there was some revisionism where they went and looked at the later He-Man series as well, and the couple of rare mini comics. And yeah, there's a script for one of the mini comics. I think that they didn't. There are a few that weren't produced that were about sort of going to be made and didn't happen. So that's that. That is the He-Man and Masters of the Universe mini comic collection. And I don't have anything much more to say. It's just awesome. If you don't have it, you should have it. If you love He-Man, if you are a completionist, if you don't have them all, it's going to save you a lot of time, and it's very enjoyable to look at, rather than filling around for the individual little comics. So I hope you all enjoyed that, and if you don't already have it, you should have it, and hopefully that helps you make a decision about what's in it and if it's worth getting. Thanks. Bye.